The community working group members of the Our Florida Reefs process asked that this recommendation have a short presentation to introduce you to some of the same science and data that they used along with their local knowledge when developing this idea. And that's because, as you'll see here in a minute, while this is one umbrella recommendation, there are many, many different goals and objectives that went into it. As mentioned, this recommendation is based on some of the current science that the working group members learned. For instance, they learned about many parts of an ecosystem. Of course, there's the animals, like the fish, corals, sponges, lobsters, etc. But there's also the habitat that those animals need in order to survive, such as clean hard bottom, nice temperatures, and clean water. And the final piece of the puzzle is the community. Us, as users, are part of the reef ecosystem. And then the working group members thought to themselves, wow, that's a lot of different moving pieces. How do you manage all of that? How do you ensure that your ecosystem has the opportunity for success? Well, they learned that a good place to start to ensure that your ecosystem has the opportunity for success is to ensure that your populations have the opportunity to reproduce. They learned that bigger is better in the marine environment, that bigger corals, bigger fishes, bigger sponges produce more offspring to feed the rest of the reef. So you may want to protect areas that have big special corals. They also learned that some species have particular areas or particular times of years that they reproduce. So for instance, you may want to protect fish spawning aggregations, or you may want to avoid coastal construction projects during certain times of the year because those projects could put sediment into the water column, affecting corals' ability to reproduce. They also learned that many species depend on different parts of the reef throughout their life cycle, or even habitats inshore, like mangroves and seagrasses. So in order to ensure that your baby fish has the opportunity to make it out onto the reef for you to enjoy later as a diver or fisher, it's important to make sure that you protect all of those habitats that the animal needs throughout its life. The working group members also learned about different kinds of management. That is, you could manage spatially, like a park. You can manage a species, like the size of a fish. Or you can manage the use and, say, have a no-motor zone. Or you can think about management more holistically and think about what tools work best where and how can those tools work together to meet your goals and objectives. The working group members learned about the importance of spatial management, about the importance of protecting enough of your region to allow for your species to migrate and travel throughout the area. They learned about examples from the Caribbean, Florida, and beyond. And what they found was that in order to maximize the benefit to your ecosystem, as well as maximize the benefit to the users, it's important to have a network of these protected areas. But that you don't necessarily need that many, they just need to be in the right place at the right time. They also learned about the different levels of protection, that an aquatic preserve is different than a state park, which is different than a no-take ecological reserve, which is different than a national park. An ecological reserve, while typically the most protective measure, doesn't necessarily need to be that big. Those areas can be about 20 to 30% of your reef, allowing for 70 to 80% to be open to divers, fishers, tourists to reap the benefits. That's just a portion of what the working group members learned. With that information, they started generating the ideas that you've seen on the rest of the website, as well as this recommendation here. And what you're seeing on the screen now are the original 17 objectives that were rolled into this one umbrella idea. Objectives anywhere from protecting from coastal construction impacts to protecting endangered species, to protecting 20 to 30% of the reef from extractive use, to protecting from water quality issues. But at the end of the day, the working group members recognized that these actions in particular had a common thread, that they all had a spatial component, that is a regional approach to managing the reef ecosystem. And they decided that all of those ideas should be combined into one big idea. That is recommended management action N146, to establish and implement a marine protected area zoning framework for the our Florida Reefs region of interest that includes, but is not limited to, no-take reserves, no anchor areas, restoration areas, and seasonal protection for spawning aggregations to enable sustainable use, reduce user conflict, and improve coral reef ecosystem condition. That's the overall umbrella idea, that Southeast Florida deserves a coordinated management plan throughout the region that incorporates many different goals and objectives to ensure the sustainable use and protection of that area. And when the working groups were talking about the region for that overall umbrella idea, they identified the region from Miami-Dade through Martin County as their region of focus. That was the first step. The second part of this recommendation was to begin to identify areas of interest within that big box that met those objectives you saw earlier. To do this, the working group members had an online marine planner tool, which is what you're seeing a screenshot of here. And you too have access to this online planning tool, which I will show you here in a minute. The working group members were able to use the best available current scientific data along with their local knowledge to identify areas of interest along the reef tract that met their objectives. So for instance, they could ask, where are the big corals, or where are our current coastal construction projects, and begin to match up those areas that met those goals and objectives. So what you will see on the rest of the website is a list of several draft areas of interest. It is a network of areas from Martin County through Miami-Dade County, and each area of interest has specific objectives associated with it. That is, each of those draft areas of interest are unique. As an example of what you will see when you open up a draft area of interest on the website is an image like this. The colors were used simply to differentiate the areas. They are not associated with a particular objective or order or what have you. Each draft area of interest has a name so that you can easily identify which one you are referring to, and each one has a narrative that helps explain the information the working group members used when identifying that area. Each area of interest has the list of objectives that area is to be meeting, information about the habitat within the area, information about the human use, and finally there's a question. Many times the community working group members are looking for specific information about what else is going on in that area, and they want you, the community, to weigh in and let them know. This is a good example of areas with different objectives. For instance, St. Lucie Inlet State Park objectives are to protect areas with high percent coral cover, provide increased protection for key reef-associated fish species and habitats, and protect from water quality issues. Whereas the two areas of interest to the south, Central St. Lucie and South St. Lucie, those objectives are to protect areas that are unique within Southeast Florida, protect 20 to 30% of the reef from extractive use, and to protect habitat from damage from fishing gear. So you can see how it's important to review the objectives for each area of interest to understand what it is trying to achieve. This is also a good example of why it's important to review the questions that the working groups have. Those two areas to the south, while they have the same objectives, that's because the working group members are looking at these as kind of an either-or situation. They're asking the community, which area do you think better matches those goals and objectives to move forward? Another example of where working group members were asking for community feedback about similar areas is shown here. You can see that the objectives for these two areas are the same. Seasonal protection for spawning aggregations, providing increased protection for key reef-associated fish species, and protecting from water quality issues. But we see that the two areas are two very different sizes. And that's because in order to protect spawning aggregations, some of the community working group members thought it was important to include the area to the north that has artificial reefs. And those artificial reefs are the little red triangles that you see there. Whereas another part of the community working group thought that the smaller green area would be sufficient to help protect the spawning aggregations in the area. So the working group members are asking, what do you think? What have you seen as far as spawning aggregations offshore? As a final example of areas of interest with different objectives and different scope, here we see areas off of Jupiter and Juno. Jupiter's objectives are seasonal protection for spawning aggregations, protect areas with high percent coral cover, protect from water quality issues. And Jupiter was identified as a rather large area because there are several different spawning aggregations throughout the region, and also because they don't know exactly where those spawning aggregations are, which can also move from year to year. So the working group members wanted to ensure that they had captured all of the area those aggregations may use. Whereas the smaller area off of Juno, objectives are to protect 20 to 30% of the reef from extractive use, seasonal protective for spawning aggregations, and protecting from water quality issues. And finally, it was important to the community working group members that you all, the rest of the community, had the correct information when reviewing this recommendation. That is, unfortunately, over a few months, some misinformation was spread throughout email and social media. For instance, there are not 28 areas of interest proposed as no-take areas off of Southeast Florida. As you will see, there are only 24 areas of interest total. And of those, only 14 have an objective of no-take or limiting extractive use. Of those 14, several have one of those questions about being an either or both situation that the working group members are looking to you to help them identify which areas meet the objectives better. When commenting on this recommendation, please take the opportunity to comment at both levels. That is, please comment on the overall umbrella idea. What do you think? Does Southeast Florida's reefs deserve a coordinated management plan across the region? Please let the community working group members know your comments and concerns about that recommendation. And also take the opportunity to comment on the draft areas of interest. Remember that it's important that you comment on the ones you support just as much as the ones you may have concerns about, so that the community working group members have a full suite of feedback. In order to comment on the recommendation and the draft areas of interest, you can do that right here on the website, and you have until March 1st to participate. And as I mentioned, you have access to the same current science that the community working group members had when developing this recommendation, as well as identifying those draft areas of interest. In order to access that, simply go to our website, click on the Mapping tab, and that will take you to our Marine Planner. And with that, the community working group members thank you for your time and participation to make this, our Florida Reefs, a true community planning process.